and welcome to another side quest episode of Talk This. It's dangerous to podcast alone. I'm one of your two hosts, Madelyn, and today, once again, Emma and I are going to be doing a head-to-head side quest battle where we debate two sides of an issue and somebody comes out the winner. It's a little unfair because Emma sort of gets to choose the winner at the end because she's our closing host, but whatever, I'm determined to win today. So in this episode, we're going to be talking about a topic that Emma and I have sort of been debating in episodes previous to this, informally, talking about a lot, and it's one we've really been looking forward to doing, and it's about choice-based games. They're really coming into vogue, they're really popular now. It seems like every game has some kind of choice-based or morality system, and we're going to be debating, is it important that those choices matter? So should those choices have impact on the game? I think that they should. Emma thinks that not necessarily. So we're going to be jumping in. We're each going to have 3-minute intros followed by 2-minute rebuttals and a closing from Emma. So without any further delay, here we go. Like I said in the intro to this episode, choice-based games and morality systems have become really popular, really in vogue in the past few years. And it seems like everywhere you go, the game at least has some kind of dialogue option or some little thing that theoretically has some sort of impact on the plot. We've talked about a lot of these games over the course of our podcast. If you go back through our episodes, you'll see that there are at least a half a dozen of them that have some aspect of this in them. And it really frustrates me when these games include these elements and it doesn't have a meaningful impact on what happens. As a player, the hugest experience I've had about this is with Telltale's The Walking Dead, where I felt that choices that I had made throughout the game were suddenly shoehorned into a pre-existing narrative at the last episode so that we could get to the ending that would fit sort of the middle ground choice. As a player, this really sort of takes away from my gaming experience, and here's why. These games really sell themselves on, oh, you get to choose and you get to create your own narrative. And if the ending, and I get that it's really hard to create a lot of different endings, but we've seen controversy over and over again when we have these two simplistic endings. And when the endings don't reflect what I've been building in this whole game, it just doesn't make sense, and it completely ruins my experience. You see, you spent time, you invested so much time into building this narrative and working towards a specific ending, and maybe you didn't want to be forced into sort of the little romancy kind of thing that we built at the end. I'm sorry, I'm ranting about this game, but I just feel like you've cheated me. You've told me that I'm going to get to play in a system where I really get to have agency, which is something that video games do better than any other art form. They give you agency, and they let you identify with what's going on, and they give you control. And if you're going to sell these games to me based on control, you've got to give it to me. And now I know Emma's gonna say, this isn't the point, right? The point of these games is not to have control. Well, then I feel like if that's not the point of them, why are we using these choice-based systems? It's a con. If you have a story you want to tell, just tell it. Don't, commit to a game that has a set story. Don't lie to me and say, okay, it's going to be choice-based. You get to choose how it turns out and then force it to go exactly where you wanted it to anyway. If you've got an ending in mind, a specific, one ending, the way it's got to end, then, you should man up or woman up or toughen up or gender neutral up and commit to the story that you want to tell. Don't pretend that I have agency when in the end you're just going to pull the rug out from under me and take that agency away. Don't bother with the choices if they don't matter.
No, that's wrong.
Madelyn and I have different opinions on choices in video games. We'll call something minor narrative interactivity and major narrative interactivity for convenience sake, with the minor being choices that the player makes that don't necessarily impact the story, and the major being choices characters that players make that do impact the story greatly, will lead you to a different ending, for instance. Madelyn thinks that the former minor narrative interactivity is not as good as the latter, or at least doesn't work as well or isn't as impressive, and I disagree. We'll use The Walking Dead from Telltale as an example since it's really easy to use as an example. The point of The Walking Dead as a game is not that you can change the story. It doesn't say at the beginning that the story will change based on how you play, but rather that the story will adapt based on how you play. And the point is learning about yourself. You go into the game with your own ideals about what you would do in this situation and your own strategies for survival. And the game constantly tests that primary objective by putting you in more and more stressful situations and giving you choices in those situations. And not only that, it also puts a little girl next to you watching your every move. Everything you choose, she sees. The ending point of The Walking Dead, and spoiler alert, although I think this game is old enough that it's okay, is not whether or not you can save Lee. It's whether you've played as Lee in a way that you think is good for Clementine. Have you taught Clementine how she ought to be in this zombie apocalypse? And do you think that you've set her up for survival in some way? The ending choice, you don't have to pick what Clementine has to do. She'll decide based on how you've played the game. And so through that, you can see, yeah, I think I've done a good job here. In episode 3 of that game, I remember I didn't even think about leaving someone to die. I had gone into it, with try to keep everyone alive, try to keep that group together. But episode 3 just sort of pushed you to the breaking point. I regretted it afterwards, sort of, but at the same time I was thinking well, if someone's a negative impact to the group, at some point you have to cut that person loose, and I have to teach Clementine that. What's important in this situation? How much are your beliefs important, and how much is your survival important? And these are good questions to ask yourself, and ones asked well through these minor narrative interactivity. The choices don't need to change the story. They need to change the character, and it needs to make you feel like you're learning something through those choices.
No, that's wrong!
First of all, I take issue with a little bit of Emma's characterization in my position. I have no problem with things that are included as minor narrative impacts in games that generally are not about narrative impact. I don't mind being oh, you can have different conversations with different people, and it changes the way they talk to you and whatever. I love Pokemon Yellow, right? It doesn't really matter how much Pikachu likes you in Pokemon Yellow, but I loved seeing Pikachu follow me around with a little heart, right? That was my intro to these choice-based games of dealing with Pikachu in Pokemon Yellow. But I also take issue, and more significantly for this debate, I take issue with Emma's idea. So she presents these choice-based things as, okay, it's not really about changing the story. It's about learning about yourself and how you would react under these scenarios. But I feel if we don't take that learning to that final step of the story actually changed because of your actions, you don't really learn anything about yourself. If there are no consequences for those actions, all you say is well, I made all these choices and it turned out the exact same way as if I had made other choices. So really what I learned is the choices that I make don't matter, which I don't think is really the point of the learning that she's trying to set up. I'll throw a TV example in here. Something that really bothered me about Westworld, and I really enjoyed Westworld, and I could talk about Westworld for ages, is that in this sort of, they set up this almost real-life video game is what the world of Westworld is, and that there's no consequences for any of these choices, right? If I'm a guest, I can run charging to host gunfire, and they can't kill me. I'll get bruised up. And I feel that's exactly what these choice-based games are a much less sophisticated version of Westworld, where we can do whatever we want with no consequences, and really not learn nearly as much about ourselves as if there was some way to see those choices played out to their ends.
No, that's wrong!
I feel Madelyn's kind of contradicting herself by saying that choices what affect how the characters treat you are okay in terms of minor narrative impact, but choices where they don't make an impact on the story aren't okay. So that's against each other. I guess I think she has more of an issue with the marketing and whether the game is marketed that you have a drastic impact on the story. And if it's not marketed that way, that's fine. If it is marketed way, it's not fine. Which, sure, I guess. But I honestly don't think, I mean, maybe at the very beginning, but Telltale games aren't marketed that way. Like, it says adapts to the choices you make. Nobody thinks that Telltale games have hugely drastic outcomes based on the choices that you pick. And I think the reason people get so upset about things like Mass Effect is because they are. You have 3 games worth of choices that lead up to 2 endings or 3 endings after the edit. And that is frustrating, right? Because all those choices should amount to something bigger than that. Whereas something like The Walking Dead, you only have certain choices. The choices you get don't impact the plot. It impacts what the characters think of you. And that's the important part, not the plot, what the characters think of you. And I think that's the case with all Telltale games. So in that case, she should like them because she thinks that choices that change how the characters think of you and interact with you are good. So I don't quite understand the point of her argument there. But I do understand frustration with lies in marketing, or what's perceived as lies in marketing. So I can get on board with that. But I think that she's viewing certain choice-based games too severely. Hey guys, Emma here. Thanks so much for listening to our episode. Kind of a rushed one again, but we're gonna work on that. But it was still a fun one to do. We obviously have very strong feelings on this matter, and we want to hear from you. What's your opinion of choice-based games? And we did focus on Telltale because that's sort of an easy topic to talk about. I think I should clarify, I was talking about season 1 and Madelyn was talking about season 3 through most of this, just so you don't get confused. But there are also other, morality systems and choice-based games that work or don't work based on the game. Let us know your opinions on those. We're on social media, always at Talk This Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Our website is talkthispodcast.com. You can email us at talktous@talkthispodcast.com. And subscribe on whatever service you use. Tell your friends about us. We really appreciate ratings and reviews. They really help us a lot. And next week we'll be talking about Age of Mythology and Inside. So look forward to that. And as always, we really hope you have a fantastic day.